series on an exposition on the epistle of First John. And so, before I touch on the epistle itself, tonight I want to share with you a lesson on the author of First John. I'm thankful for feedback on previous expository sermons. It seems like some of the members have found them helpful. Usually, I try to have a short theme before it becomes monotonous, but this series on 1 John will be more than a month long. There is much that we can learn from 1 John, and there are many topics, themes, and subtopics in 1 John, and so I hope that this will keep your interest on the expository series in your heart. 1 John also, I want to add, is easy to memorize. I remember early in my ministry, in the midweek Bible class, we went through 1 John, verse by verse. And every week, before we start the lesson, we will try to memorize the portion that we covered last week. And I like to say that most of the members in the class did quite well. Let's have a look at the Apostle John. John was one of the 12 apostles and a prominent leader in the early church, along with James and Peter. Peter, James, and John. These three are in the inner circle of Jesus. Always with Jesus, sometimes the only ones that were with Jesus. John is the author of 5 books in the Bible: the Gospel of John, the epistles of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelations. If you limit it to the 12 apostles, John has written more than any of the apostles, including Peter and Matthew. Although John wrote more books than any of the apostles, Matthew is quite verbose, and so his one book is actually contains more words than all the 5 books that John has written. So in the number of books, John wrote the most. In the number of words, Matthew won the cup. John, it is believed, is the only apostle that was not martyred. All the other 11 apostles died for their faith. But John lived to a ripe old age, was at Ephesus for a while, and then he was banished to the island of respect most. And so tonight, we want to ask the question, who was the Apostle John? Most of us know something about him. But I believe tonight we will learn a little bit more about this apostle. After Jesus died, resurrected, and gone to heaven, the church was pretty much in the hands of the apostle. And John was recognized as one of the pillars of the church. Matthew chapter 4, verses 21 to 22, the Bible says, going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in the boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus caught them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. John, the brother of James, the son of Zebedee, was a fisherman. He was one of the first apostles that were called by Jesus. Fast forward this to the time of the early church. He was a pillar of the Christian church. In the book of Galatians, Paul tried to defend his position as an apostle called by Christ in the later years, and try to have some form of authority. And he vested his authority on the fact that John, the apostle, gave him the right hand of fellowship. It is like sometimes we need to do something, and people will ask, where is your badge? But if you have a letter from the Prime Minister, then you have authority. And Paul is trying to appeal to the fact that John has sanctioned his ministry. Galatians 2, 7 to 9, on the contrary, they recognize that I have been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles or the uncircumcised. James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. I know there are some people who like to quote names. I was with that person was in my car, and this guy I had lunch with. Here, Peter is trying to say John, including Peter, which is referred to as Cephas, and James, not the apostle, but rather the brother of Christ, are mentioned as being the pillar of the church. It is interesting that we learn that the name of John and his brother are attached to the nickname, the sons of thunder. Mark chapter 3, verse 16 to 19. These are the 12 he appointed. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name which means sons of thunder. This has been quite interesting, and there have been some discussion about it. It is a nickname that was given to both James and John. There could be brothers who had bad tempers, sons of thunder. And we see a hint of this in Luke chapter 9, verse 54, when the people in Samaria do not seem to accept them when they were passing through with Jesus. And so they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire now from heaven to destroy them? I think this fits the nickname, sons of thunder. But for our information, Jesus did no such things. In fact, Jesus rebuked James and John for even suggesting this idea. Sons of thunder can mean that these people maybe have a loud voice, or they are impatient, but we have no real definite idea of what it is. But certainly, John, not James, just John, one of the sons of Zebedee, was in the inner circle. He was there when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. If we read that account, it is a very significant account because Jairus was an important person. The incident was quite emotional. People in the house have given up the fact that Jairus' daughter was dead. The idea was, if you have come sooner, my daughter would not have died. But Jesus made the point. She is not dead. She is asleep. And taking Peter, James, and John, they went into the room, and Jesus raised them from the dead. Jesus also took Peter, James, and John up to a mountain when he was transfigured. And I believe, like the baptism of Jesus, the transfiguration of Jesus is the most significant event. But Jesus took only 3 apostles up there. There, they saw how Jesus was transfigured and how Moses and Elijah appeared before them. And they were so impressed with what they saw that when the event was over, they wanted to build 3 tabernacles. But Jesus did not, because they have missed the entire significance. Because the voice of God at the transfiguration says, "This is my beloved Son. Hear him." Moses, representing the law, is no more. Elijah, representing the prophets, is no more. Now it is Jesus Christ. Then on the night of Jesus' betrayal, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him to pray. Another significant moment of the life of Jesus. But I think even more than the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, at the cross of Jesus in John 19:26, Jesus, when he saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, referring to John, standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son," entrusting the care of his mother to the Apostle John. This is so fitting because the life of John is one that has been sheltered and protected by God, and he lived to a ripe old age, very suitable to take care of Jesus' mother. The term, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is only found in John. And if John is the writer of the book of John, which we believe he is, then he is using this term to describe himself. It is very common for authors at that time not to mention their name, and simply John did not mention his name except 5 times, that I am the disciple whom Jesus loved. Most interestingly, in John chapter 13, verse 24, there is this incident. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter mentioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Here we see how noticeable is the affection that Jesus has shown to John. And again, in chapter 20, verses 3 to 4, therefore Peter and the other disciple went out, and they went towards the tomb. They both ran together, and the disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. Sometimes when we think about the Apostle John, we think about John being an old person. But at this time, when you see Peter and John running to the tomb, actually John was the faster runner. He outran Peter and got there first. And although John was fast on his feet, Peter was faster in his heart. Because the moment Peter got there, Peter went into the tomb. But John, when they arrived, he hesitated. The thing that differentiates John from the rest of the apostles is that he lived to a ripe old age. John 21, 20 to 24, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, how about him? And this is what Jesus said. If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow him. Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers, and that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And yet, this seems to suggest the long life of the Apostle John. And so, in a nutshell, here are some things about the Apostle John. He was the only apostle that is not martyred. He lived to a ripe old age. He has been respected by one and all. And it is said at his old age, John would go around the disciples and bless the individual and constantly encourage them, my little children, love one another. And this is what John would have done. Also, we find among John's disciples were people like Polycarp, Ignatius, leaders of the church. And this sometimes people that are referred to as the early church fathers, they have written epistles and books, but not inspired like the Bible, but a great influence in the early church. And so, as we have said in the introduction, John wrote the most 5 books in the New Testament. And Matthew wrote 1 book, but it is a long book. I mentioned just now that in number of words, Matthew has overtaken John, but I was thinking of Luke and not Matthew. John still is the one that wrote the most books and the most words, and Matthew comes second. And so the top 3 New Testament writers are Paul, Luke, and John. And number 4 would be Matthew. John ministered at Ephesus. And if you make a trip to Ephesus, which is modern day Turkey, the tour guide will actually show you the house in which John actually lived. You have to take this with a pinch of salt, but it is one of the tourist attractions in Turkey. And later, he was exiled to the Isles of Patmos. The name that we call John is what he referred to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And certainly, when you read the epistle of 1 John, there is a lot of this love that John puts in his epistles. He is called, Mark chapter 3, verse 17, the sons of thunder. And this could refer to his speech, to his temper, and perhaps his ambition. I'd like to refer you to Matthew chapter 20, verse 20 and 21, in which the mother of James and John came to Jesus and asked a certain thing of him. And he said to her, "What couldst thou?" She said to him, "Command that these, my 2 sons, may sit one on your right hand and one on your left hand in your kingdom." I think not only James and John are very ambitious, but their mothers are also very ambitious for them. I remembered at the start of this lesson, I mentioned that James was not in the inner circle, but throughout the lesson, James, John, and Peter, all 3 are part of the inner circle. I apologize for this mistake. They are in the inner circle. John is a pillar in the early church. We don't know about James. This was the point I tried to make at the start. Rather, it is James, the Lord's brother, who was a leader and a pillar in the early church. James was not mentioned as a pillar. I think he probably was. But certainly James, John, and Peter are part of the inner circle. John was a fisherman. And when Jesus first called him, he was with his brother and his father, and they were taking care of the nets in the boat. And the most memorable thing about John was that Jesus entrusted his mother for him to take care. I hope tonight's lesson will whet your appetite and make you look forward to the book of 1 John. We will start on this new series on the 8th of August. But there's nothing to stop you from opening your Bible and reading 1 John. And if you will, commit some of